fiance for buying me this um shirt. I love this shirt. This is my favorite character, Leorio, right here. I mean, Gone Freaks is the man. But I love me some. I don't know. People they underestimate Leorio. They think just because he's like just like smart, and he got his education a little late as far as his powers and such, and how he pretty much they were helping him through the games. I love him. Favorite character. He's my baby. So today is the day we're gonna finish the we're gonna finish the Fledgling Handbook 101 from PC Cast's House of Night series. I'm excited. Now, you guys, I got a whole bottle of water this time because you know how tired I can get. And even if I take a break, I'm still gonna finish this book today. We got this good chunk right here. I broke it up into 4 chunks because it's a lot of words. It's like a lot of small words, though. Chapter 4, A Brief Introduction of Vampire History. Vampires have always existed. We have walked the earth as long as grass has grown, the sun has shone, and the moon has turned in its elliptical orbit. While we do have a written history better preserved and more ancient than humans, we did not gather as a society until the ninth century BC. It was then that a unique vampire high priest named Lilith emerged from the fertile region known as Mesopotamia. Lilith was greatly gifted by Nyx, having an affinity for spirit, as well as the prophetic ability to envision the final threads of a vampire's life. Using her goddess-given gifts, Lilith called together the high priests of every major vampire coven, along with their consorts and warriors. She persuaded her sisters and brothers to form what she titled the Vampire High Council, a ruling body that would be the center of all vampire people. In it, she, along with the 7 leaders of the major civilized vampire covens, set about creating the standards of our unique and beautiful society, wherein women are held sacred, as is the worship of the goddess, and men are appreciated and respected. Lilith and her new Vampire High Council debated long about where they should make their home. They knew it must be a place that was defendable from human invasion and exploitation, but it should also had to be near a major seaway for travel and supply. And of course, it should be a place of beauty and wonder, something that soothed and nurtured our innate love of earth and the magic of nature. Finally, after much searching, during the 8th century, Lilith and the High Council decided to make the blue island of Capri, off the southern coast of Italy, their home. In no time, vampires spread along the exquisite Amalfi Coast, founding and then acting as philanthropic patrons of beautiful Pompeii and Herculaneum, twin cities of light and magic and art. Lilith's own words best describe what our ancient home was like. The Amalfi Coast is a flower-filled garden labyrinth with Pompeii and its sister Herculaneum at the exquisite entrance to its maze, enticing with coquettish charms for all to enter, and Capri is the glistening treasure at its center. Until August 24th, 79 AD, Capri, Pompeii, and Hercules were bound, heart and soul. On that day, tragedy struck both vampire and human. The great brooding mountain known as Vesuvius erupted, consuming Pompeii and Herculaneum, and killing so many human consorts that it is a sad and uncountable number of vampires lost their lives that day, attempting to save their human forms from death that rained from the sky. The tragedy of Pompeii. Note, the tragedy of Pompeii was initially told verbatim and passed down from one generation of storyteller to the next. It was finally written down sometime during the 17th century and recently translated for this edition of the Fledgling Handbook. Fledgling. We truly hope all of you not only survive, but thrive in each house of night, discovering inner strengths you may never have realized you possessed. Even today, there are still many mysteries surrounding the power of the vampire race. Our limits are yet unknown. This story is not as old as our kind, but illustrates the many gifts we have been given by Nyx, and is, in particular, a legend concerning the misdirection of these abilities. In 58 AD, Theodora and Antonia were born to a Pompeian slave. Their owner was an experienced slave trader. Brutus considered himself a connoisseur of females and had amassed a fortune through his expertise. He was known as shrewd and exhibited no hesitation in taking advantage of those who were not. Brutus followed trends in Rome, Napoli, Florence, and their nearby port towns for the latest entertainments. He trained slaves to meet current popular indulgences, whether as gladiators, chefs, masseurs, or experts in pleasure. Always sensitive to demand, Brutus earned anything imagined. Brutus ensured anything imagined could be found in his stables, were one willing to pay the price. He had moved to Pompeii, reputed for its love of luxury, to pursue fresh income for the more decadent populations. Among these populations were active and retired military men, and many had joined a new religion, Mithraism, the worship of the bull. Brutus saw opportunity there and enlisted as a new initiate. After all, these men were reputed for lusty indulgences and the money to command them. A secretive sect, human art history books depict a white whale bull being bled, interpreted as a sacrifice. This is inaccurate. Vampire scrolls from Capri indicate this bull elicited an ancient dark power. Members used this elaborately carved knife to wound the bull and drink its blood, bonding to its power, much like a malevolent imprint. Soon after joining, a man became a terrifying fighter in war, returning home with great honor, but in the long term, such cruel energy brought only tragedy and destruction. Brutus had heard the members of this mysterious belief had become more of whoever they were. Too harsh, aggressive, carnal. He ignored these warnings. Such men were perfect patrons for a mercenary like Brutus. He understood their drive for constant stimulation and shared the never sated hunger for the exotic and forbidden. He wore their knife with pleasure for marketing potential. The handle carved into the shape of a bull clearly showed above his belt. In Theodora and Antonia, he saw enormous potential. For twins to survive birth was rare, but to grow into such beautiful beings was phenomenal. Matching sets of black, sooty eyes were surrounded by glowing olive skin, and beneath delicate noses, full lips framed pearl white teeth. With proper instruction, they could someday fetch an enormous sum. There was no actual childhood in ancient times. Training began young. The girls, with their natural grace, were well versed in the arts before their bodies began to mature. Their beauty inspired Brutus with a scheme. Sell them to the Mithrians for their virgin blood, then continue to rent them to other patrons who might be intrigued with the idea of enjoying a female previously used by the fearsome warriors. In historical context, it was frowned upon to abuse slaves, but not prevented. Females, in particular, could be loaned, rented, traded, or sold. Brutus intended to profit in all ways, interviewing likely clients among the Mithriac membership as Theodora and Antonia grew into young women. Throughout their early years, Brutus carefully maintained a distance. It was foolish to tempt oneself with future pristine merchandise, but as the twins' beauties ripened, he found it progressively difficult to ignore them. The idea of keeping the lovely twins for himself also began to work his way into his mind. Unlike Brutus, the children were embraced by a loving community, where many believed they were truly two halves of a whole, never far apart. Some said one soul must have cleaved into the mother's womb. Theodora was full of fire, always searching and questioning, quick to anger, but quicker to laugh. She reigned in the slave quarters with her storytelling skills and practice before bedtime. "Nia, watch me now," she would cry, and all heads would turn to see her newest stunt. Her passions were contagious. She could engage even the most curmud. Oh wait, hold on. This is a word for you. It's Curmudgeonly, Curmudgeonly, and waspish into long forgotten forms of childhood play. Antonia was her opposite, calm, soothing, and kind. Her nature healed and comforted. A quiet and melodious voice made her songs achingly sweet. She did not hide behind Theodora. She balanced and reflected her, at times even joining her antics or scrambling to catch up. calling out, "Wait for me!" Such a personality is readily seen as easily used, but Antonia was no fool. The kitchen help often sent her to the market to bargain for the best produce and meat. The butcher, known for his stinginess, nonetheless anticipated her visits, even though he knew she would get the best of him. Perhaps it was how she was always complimenting him in the ways he longed to hear: respect, gratitude, and acknowledgments of his experience. He returned home alone each night. Her words warmed him as he drifted off to sleep. Together, the two complimented instead of competed. Smiles followed the children as they went about tasks in the quarters. Their dark, glossy ringlets bounced together and apart as they shared secrets and laughter. More glances of the appreciation came their way as they matured into young women. Brutus began to receive offers for the twins, but curtly rejected them all. For the first time in his trade, he had no answers, only an unsettling and ever-growing obsession with the two, for he was a male as any other. Even his Mithraeus brothers, whose interest and friendship he had cultivated, were making inquiries. He found himself avoiding their questions. Then one fateful morning, Brutus awoke to a cry from the slave quarters. Antonia lay curled around her sister, and the usual energetic Theodora lay glistening in her own sweat, pale and limp. The grief-stricken girl told him she had awakened to see a young man, sapphire crescent on his brow, leaning over Theodora, placing a fingertip upon her forehead. Just before dawn, Theodora had been marked. Enraged, Brutus left the quarters. His options had suddenly altered drastically. He no longer had a matched set of noble young women. One was ensured to either be lost to him as a vampire or die in the process. Even more, his own secret fantasy was ruined. And Brutus flushed with anger and realization. But Brutus thought further. Maybe he could turn this into some advantage. He had been patient all these years. Perhaps Theodora could be manipulated on her sister's behalf after joining the vampire palace. With proper promotion, he could work Antonia twice as often, or demand her sister join her for sport. Hours later, Brutus returned to find his servant sitting, flanking Antonia. She wore a glazed expression as she stared into nothingness. He moved forward to shake her out of this trance, but to his astonishment, an elder servant boldly thrust up and halted him and demanded him, "Leave her be for now, leave her be." And in even greater astonishment, he did as he was told. The separation of the girls created worthy gossip. Some wondered when Antonia would herself change. Others suggested Theodora had actually escaped or been secretly sold to pirates, or that was this dramatic ploy that Brutus put on to raise the value of the twins. I don't have an OnlyFans, sorry. Antonia simply laid as if it were dead in their room. At one point, the cook even checked for a pulse. In the place of Capri, the vampire struggled as well. Theodora, having been revived by her pheromones, demanded her twin be brought to the isle to join her. But for centuries, entry to the palace had been forbidden to humans, and for excellent reasons. Vampires were often seen as a threat by ignorant humans, and past fantasies had manipulated mobs into destroying houses of night. Additionally, in ancient times, there had been fledglings who had not controlled themselves accordingly, and imprinting had occurred with tragic results. Hence, the standard for fledglings had been set, Theodora being no exception. This plunged her into a deep depression, so intense she failed to notice the compassion on new faces surrounding her. Had she studied anyway, she would have seen one face in particular watching her with the focus only a vampire can. He could not take his eyes off Theodora. Thank you. She would have seen one face in particular watching her. I said that already. This young vampire, a recent son of Erebus, had been a Roman soldier before his change. His prowess in war had brought him great renown. One battle in particular had been recorded and celebrated. He had overcome a Celtic leader, purportedly a powerful druid. Originally a nameless slave, he was allowed to be a general, to adopt the name of his slain foe, Drusus. Drusus had entered Capri as a fledgling, but not as an average adolescent. His years as a slave, then as a warrior, had carved his body into art. I do have an Instagram. What is my Instagram? Just send me one of those whispers and I'll tell it to you if you want to follow me on there. After the change, his physique emerged as that of a young god. Muscular arms and legs met in flawless torso, braced by wide shoulders and topped with a warm smile. Arched brows, framed eyes, the color of the sea. Now Druis was undergoing another change, one unique to him, but known throughout the time for the rest of us. It's called love at first sight. He withdrew from the painful scene as Theodora collapsed in despair against Hestia, the princess of Capri. But the young warrior had a plan. That evening, a boat sailed from Capri, and a bargain was struck with Brutus, probably through some level of powerful persuasion, best left unknown. Antonia moved to a small but opulent residence in Pompeii, a private apartment only the wealthy might own. There, Drusus sat and held the hand of Theodora's double. He found himself staring into the thick-fringed, adoring eyes of Antonia, as tears of gratitude turned into jewels sliding down her cheeks. Although he felt no masculine urges, as he had with Theodora, Drusus nonetheless knew this human was one he must protect at all costs. She was the other half of the one he loved, and necessary for Theodora to feel whole. Drusus made a pledge to be the official courier between the two until Theodora made her change. Believing with his entire heart that this would occur, he returned to the palace with Antonia, first message to Theodora. He promised help to the twins' shoulder. His promise helped the twins shoulder their painful separation. The potential of their reunion, although possibly years away, kept Theodora hopeful. She excelled in classes and embraced the rituals. Antonia accepted the financial assistance of Drusus and opened a bakery down the street from the particular besotted butcher. Drusus, a man of his word, was often seen traveling back and forth with gifts, scrolls, and drawings sent from one sister to the other, some of which have survived the centuries. He stayed a respectful distance from Theodora, but his devotion to her was painfully obvious to everyone. Even her twin recognized the longing in his eyes when he produced a missive from Capri and held it an instant longer than necessary, simply to touch something of hers. The only shadow during the years of waiting was the threat of Brutus. Oh no, thank you. Rumors circulated of how the sudden loss of Theodora and Antonia had inflamed his known temper, but the experiences of Mithridatic rituals expanded into chaos. His rages came from nowhere. His employees constantly suffered from the escalating cruelty. Over and over, people heard him muttering one-sided conversations with the missing twins. Slaves became terrified as the false dialogue shifted and signs of madness emerged. Brutus coerced themselves into female slaves to dye their hair, shape their brows, and don the pale-colored tunics left behind by the twins. He walked the night, carrying their abandoned scarves, holding them to his face, inhaling. As time went on, he would withdraw his knife from his sheath and polish it with the same scarves. Brutus might have been obsessed, but he was not foolish. He discovered Antonia's whereabouts and often spied from the shadows. He would watch Drusus arrive and then leave before dawn to return home. Other times the vampire would remain in the apartments until the next day. Brutus wrongly decided Drusus had stolen Antonia for himself, and the thought drove him insane. Somehow he would retrieve his matching prized possessions. Somehow he would wreak revenge on the vampire warrior who had taken them from him. Meanwhile, Theodora had surprised the elders of Capri with how rapidly she grasped and implemented the skills they taught. Their greatest surprise, however, occurred during her first casting. While conducting a ceremony, Hestia felt a surge of Nyx's energy and glanced about for the source. Her eyes fell on the young maiden who stood eyes closed, wave shimmering down her arms and leaping off her fingertips. Theodora slowly stepped into the center of the circle, floating forward like a wraith. The material of her gown billowed about her in unnaturally slow waves. Her heavy braids uncoiled from about her head and then unfurled into a cloud around her face. Thick, black lashes lay upon her cheeks as she raised her chin and lifted her hands, palms upward, receiving an invisible gift. Everything in the circle. Some wrote ladder how a heavy gold comb loosened from her hair and drifted slowly to the ground. Blessed be spoke Theodora, voicing Nyx's eternal promise. An element had claimed her. Theodora had been chosen to embody spirit. The circle ended, leaving Theodora awakened and heavily aware. The energy she had previously used to explore the world became internally directed, slowing her, lending depth to thoughts. She viewed her surroundings in a fashion many painters allude to, which is the sense of eyes experienced in all three dimensions of a subject, not simply face value, but encircling in thought and thorough, knowing it completely, knowing it intimately. She knew face. She studied her hands, held them before her face, then looked up between them to receive the steady gaze of Drusus. Hestia wrote of their profound bonding upon Theodora's recognition of him that evening, ignoring questions and compliments and comments about her display of energy during the circle. Theodora's eyes were on Drusus as she finally understood the longing in his face and surrendered to his magnetic force. They slipped from the throng and fled to the shore of the island. As sounds carried over water, many ducked their heads and smiled to accidentally hear the passionate moments that followed. From then on, they were seldom apart, but for his travels to Pompeii on behalf of the twin sisters' exchanges. Months become years, and the day came when a celebratory circle was cast to ask Nyx's blessing for a newly changed vampire. In the gathering, Theodora sank into the trance that elicited her unusual force within spirit. This time, due to her passage into completion, it was much stronger. Everyone stood mesmerized as the flickering candles stilled and motes of dust hang in the air. Moths, wings frozen in flight, cast shadows against the walls, and suspended smoke stopped its lazy drift upon upwards in a gauzy web about them. Whatever mass she gazed upon became motionless. When the circle ended, few noticed Hestia's troubled face, but she later wrote of her concern for power, and one so inexperienced. That August evening, the Isle of Capri celebrated Theodora's initiation, and with great joy, she prepared to finally reunite with her sister. On the 23rd day, they sailed forth to join Antonia. Drusus had prepared for this moment at dawn. As the sun warmed the sky, he knelt before Theodora to offer his warrior's eternal oath. It is said that his eloquence and sincerity were as beautiful as the scene itself. With a cry of delight, Theodora accepted his pledge, and the son of Erebus took the young priest into his arms as their companions cheered. The ship approached port as the western sun cast its glow upon the figure of Antonia. Ignoring decorum, Theodora flung aside the tent flaps and leapt across the gaping ship, flinging herself upon her laughing sister. Words tumbled out as fast as tears of joy fell. They embraced, and they became a whole again. That evening was the festival of Vulcanalia, the Roman god of fire, and much was planned throughout the countryside. The populations loved opulence and luxury. Lavish parties were held, most notably one being thrown by Drusus to honor the twins. By now, he found it much more easier to tell them apart. In the daylight, Antonia had changed. Her features were etched, and her body had fullness not seen in young vampires. Still, she was lovely, the mortal reflection of Theodora's near timeless features. Their many friends toasted to them. Had Drusus indulged as heartedly as it following wine, he might not have noticed the hovering shadow by the atrium gates. Brutus had lurked on the other side of the walls, listening to the laughter and stories. Hours passed. His tension mounted. It was all he could do not to tear down the wrought iron gate and reclaim his possessions. How could he destroy Drusus and recapture his slaves? Hold on, y'all. I need some water. About that time. Immersed in his own bloodlust, Brutus was caught off guard when a hand slammed down on his shoulder. Between gritted teeth, Drusus again used his powers of persuasion on the traitor, who angrily slunk away into the shadows, fingering his beloved knife and murmuring, "But they are mine, mine." The morning sun bled through the strange haze throughout the city. Most residents attributed it to all parties and fires of the previous night. At the sea gate, the twins' parting ways was hardly as before. Theodora and Antonia shed tears, but they were blended with smiles and promises. Their fingers framed each other's faces as their foreheads touched. Thick, glossy curls entwined when they whispered one more secret to another. Children again, a last farewell, and Theodora boarded with Drusus, waving to Antonia until she could no longer see the blazing red scarf her sister fluttered in return. They settled into their tented quarters to sleep through the return of Capri. Hours later, the sea suddenly became turbulent. An enormous wave hoisted the boat, then released it. A vessel slamming down with a tearing groan. A molted sky grew from the shore. Shouts from a nearby fleet became other vampires, hurrying towards Pompeii and Herculaneum. Frantically racing ships through the rough waters, Hestia drew alongside and explained a vision that she'd had the previous night. Danger, heat, a blanket of steam, and dust enveloping the coast. Then she froze and pointed eastward. Everyone turned to see a horrifying sight. Vesuvius had erupted. A black mushroom of smoke bloomed as fire scarred the sky for miles. Many vampires slept in the nearby towns. Even more humans had begun their day. Everyone was in danger. The vampires were informed of the past hours. An odd gray morning. How the earth shuddered and convulsed, shattering amphorias of wine across tiled floors and appending lit braziers that quickly licked into fires. The widespread terror and confusion. Where are the children? The horses are screaming. What do we do? I cannot breathe. I cannot see. Led to panic, releasing the pride side of survival. Primal. The city gates clogged with carts, animals, and bodies as peppering of tiny hot pumice began to fall, fueling a deeper wave of fear into the crowds. Some scrambled into ships, others died falling beneath stamping hooves or whatever they were crushed by. Looters foraged through abandoned homes, and one greedy slave owner capitalized on the situation and sold every slave he had to guard property for the rich. New masters fled to safety as those slaves were left behind. Theodora knew who that must be. The boats finally docked. The vampires ripped bedding from the ships, then soaked it in the sea. They wrapped themselves for protection and pressed through the throng, exciting the city. Everything was heavily coated with dust and rice-like pellets. The heat was intense. The wise had escaped while others peered through doorways, fearful of burns from the biting pumice. Nearby, a child screamed in the smoky gloom. Sobs could be heard from within the ship. Vampires fanned out, seeking friends. Theodora called to Drusus to follow her to Antonia's bakery. Soon they staggered into a still erect building. A body lay there, the butcher, stabbed, a knife, hilt protruding from his back. Theodora knelt and recognized a familiar bull carved into the knife. Brutus. A strong foreboding flooded her limbs as she pierced together what had happened. Telling Drusus, Brutus must have come for Antonia, and this man died in an attempt to protect her. They struggled. Brutus got what he wanted. But where are they? The knife. The cave they worshipped, and beneath the house of Mysterious. He has her. She is there. I feel her there. My sister is trapped in a cave with a madman, and he will never let her go. Theodora emerged from the bakery amid fresh cries from help from a nearby brothel. A brothel. Other vampires were struggling to pull humans toward the city gate when the ground heaved beneath them. A denser cloud roiled out of volcano and spread through the streets. Another building groaned as its roof caved in from the deadly weight. Surviving vampires helped to record the next events in Hestia's journal. It was stated that Theodora closed her eyes and stood head bowed in the center of the street. Obvious warnings, shouts, or sizzles of pellets on her skin. Waves of power began to emanate from her as she slowly stretched her arms and opened her eyes and focused everything on the air before her and the air up the street. Through the city, past the hills, and into the heart of the monstrous volcano, everything in the path of her vision was erased, frozen in whatever direction it had been going, locked in an arc or fault or flicker. Her chin lifted slightly, her eyes glazed, and the suspension broadened to cover the city. She closed her eyes. Through all of the silence, she heard nothing. Duh, it's silence. Jewess heard her whisper, "Hurry." Vampires behind her had stopped in astonishment as the wave she sent forth rolled out of the city. Her arms began to tremble with effort, and they recognized what she offered. At inhuman speeds, their shapes tore holes through the ash-filled air, vacant tunnels appearing behind them. None of them have experienced anything like it, but they adapted immediately to the strange situation as they parted the atmosphere, which it created a perfect retreat path. Drusus tore through the damaged streets, leaping over bodies until he reached his destination. He called for Antonio when he got to the door, and replied a weak reply. He waded through the carnage, discovering a previously hidden door, broken open from the heavy earth, and clambering his way downstairs. He gasped at the scene below. Antonia tied up at the altar, the enormous statue of a bull having toppled across her, but still alive. With a prayer to the goddess, he heaved and rocked the statue away, gently gathering the damaged body of his love's double, and staggered out of the cavern back on the streets. In front of the baker, Theodore's eyes remained closed. It was Brutus who found her. Exactly as he had hoped, the bait had been taken. It was his chance. The butcher had nearly ruined his plan, but now, withdrawing the life from the body, Brutus smiled. Theodora, you too are mine. The rope settled over her head and across her upper arms. He tried to pull it tight, but was startled to find her as rigid as the marble columns of the city. Unfazed, Brutus slipped a rough hand behind her head and lifted his knife. Mine, mine. With a swift motion, he gouged a hole in her neck and plunged it with his lips as Drusus emerged from the dusty passageway with Antonia. Jerked out of her trance, Theodora's eyes flew open to find Brutus wrapped around her. An insane leer pasted across his face. Now you both are mine. Always. Shocked, Theodora looked past him to see her sister's broken body held by Drusus. Inside of her, something tore. Something she did not know she could separate from her being. Instead of dealing with Brutus and retrieving her focus of the spirit, searching rescuers, Theodora abandoned all of it. Young and inexperienced in her gift, a red rage now consumed her. Blurring her mind, she drew in the powers previously directed at the volcano, gathering them in a rush. Theodora snarled at Brutus, Nia, watch me now, and flung her life force in a hatred and horror at the man who dare harm her sister. Slowly, deliberately, Brutus was lifted high above the ground, where it began spinning so fast, and then an invisible push flew him backwards until his head split against a marble statue. His body sagged downwards, twitching, leaving a grim trail at the base of the monument where he sat upright against the wall. The falling ash regained his reign over Pompeii, showering Brutus, coating him immediately. There he remained for eternity, legs splayed, mouth open, as Vivius claimed his form of its own. Oh, wow. Theodora collapsed in the street. The anger crater blasted its contents into the sky. Roofs caved, walls toppled. Hell had arrived. With the last of his warrior strength, Drusus heaved her upon his shoulders. He blindly stumbled toward the city gate, and he finally reached the ship. He heaved frantically to exit the deadly shore, pulling for their lives, and exhausted survivors sailed to Capri. Vampires on the boat administered as best they could to the three. Bodies were rinsed, mouths cleaned, eyes wiped, as Hestia gently washed the grime from Theodora's face. She stared several more times. Theodora's sapphire tattoos had disappeared from her brow. There's no explanation. Even experienced vampire healers had no idea what that meant. The healers did recognize one thing. Antonia was beyond her skills. Broken backs and ribs, crushed hips, and more. The ash coated her lungs, weakened her body by minute. Each breath was obviously agony. She moaned in her unconscious state. Julius was beside himself, hoping to restore her. He tore his own wrists open to force blood between her lips. She roused, but respite was brief. Lying next to Theodora, Antonia turned her head and with dull eyes found her twin. She groaned but still reached out to weave her fingertips together. Wait for me, she said. And then she was still. Awash in grief, Drusus fell to his knees before Hestia. No, this cannot happen. I cannot lose Theodora as well. I cannot bear it. In Pompeii, she released her power against the slave trader. Now she is not dead, yet not alive. How could this be? My love has no mark on her, yet she is gone, and where? Hestia knew Nyx was great power, fueled by the spirit world. However, the physical world has its own rules, and even a goddess cannot always command them. The change makes vampire near timeless, but not invincible. A painful lesson. Hestia considered a moment. Drusus, there is a way, but it should be shrewd and in misery. Unpredictable. I can only try. The vampires of Capri gathered around a large table. From within an elaborately embroidered bag, Hestia poured 10 marbles, so white they glowed. Each had a crudely carved rune in the center. She said, "These are ancient, from a source no one knows or understands. They are recognized by the goddess, but not of the goddess. They are recognized by the goddess, but not of the goddess. They come from a prophetess who existed long before our history was recorded." She closed her eyes and entered a trance, spoke in a long, forgotten tongue. "Drusus, son of Erebus, warrior to Theodora, you must release yourself to find her. You must destroy yourself to save her. You must surrender yourself to return her." Thank you, and I will. Give me a follow if you like. She opened her eyes and traced a circle on the table before Drusus, then a star to contain it. She gathered the stones, holding each aloft, allowing the thread of silver veins to reflect the candlelight before returning them to the bag. She held it open to him. "Drusus, allow the stones within to find your hands as you take them down from the bag. Center one stone on each separate arc of the circle." He followed her instructions. 5 stones in the bag. "Now, allow the remaining stones to find you as well, and place them above the original set toward each point." He did the same thing. "Drusus, with the questions we have asked the powers, I can only hope to understand these answers. Theodora's soul has fractured, branched away. Her energies maintain her life above the ground, as does a tree. But they also flow where we do not see, taking her to the roots of her soul. She nears Nyx's realm in the other world, but she is not whole. It is only through a spirit journey that you might find her branches and draw them together." Hello. "And draw them together." Excuse me. She indicates another pair of stones. "And here is the bridge, where the journeys converge. All crossings are challenging. Some are allowed, but once, offering no return." I'm reading the Fledgling Handbook 101 from the House of Night series. In my other videos, I read more chapters, but I'm literally almost done. I'm at the end. So, all crosses are challenging. Some are allowed but once, offering no return. Here it is paired with spirit. This is where a decision will be made. Yes, you guys, I'm reading the Fledgling Handbook 101 from the House of Night series by PC Cast. Yep. She saw the dangers indicated in the other 3 pairings and their placement on the circle, but stopped there. Drusus was Theodora's warrior. Here lay his task. Hestia's shoulders sagged. And if y'all want to read the whole book, I started at the beginning like 3 streams ago, so y'all can always start there. This is literally the last part of the book, so if y'all listen to what I'm reading now, you won't really understand it. And no, it's not like Harry Potter. It's a series about vampires. So it's literally not like Harry Potter. And PC Cast wrote it. PC Cast. They were on the bestseller list. Really popular books. But this is just the Fledgling Handbook, which is it's pretty much as if you're a part of the world and you're going to these schools. So they give you a handbook. And no, not like Garfield. It's like, if I had to compare it to something, it's literally a vampire series. Like, think Twilight, but better. But better. Way better. No, not Star Wars. I'm going to continue now. All right. Drusus was Theodora's warrior. Here lay his task. Hestia's shoulders sagged. "Drusus, this path is one you must forge, without the confines of your body. There is great risk here. To leave your body and travel on the energy of your spirit, threatens both life forces, the seen and the unseen. He shook his head. I must go. Show me the path. Every moment takes her farther away from me. Tears welled in her eyes to see the desperation in his face. She took his hand and said, I have a poison. Too much will kill a vampire, but in a small, constant dose, it will hold your body suspended and free your mind. This is a terrible risk. I'm not sure who designed the cover. Let me see. Cover designed by Angela Goddard. Angela Goddard. Cover art by Alex Volkshutter. It's a really weird name, but the cover design is by Angela Goddard. That's who designed it. All the books look like that. If I have another one around here, I'll show it to you guys. And I bought this book from Books A Million years ago, but I'm sure if you want to buy it online, you can. And it was $12.99, $14.99 if you live in Canada. And yes, it's like Twilight, but way more booky, and it's better. I mean, once I get to the actual story, y'all gonna love it. But this is just the handbook. So if you were a vampire in the series and you were going to one of the House of Night schools, which is pretty much like vampire school for vampires once you get turned, this is the handbook they would give you, right? Which is why it's called the Handbook 101. So you would read this book. And there are pictures in the book on some pages of some things. Like there's a picture of something. Like there are pictures in here. It's really interactive. It's literally like a vampire textbook. It's just that in the actual books, no, there are no pictures. So yeah, but well, I'm gonna finish this book. Okay, so this is a terrible risk. I must take care in administering each dose, but I will do this. Juices, I fear it is wrong, but I will do it. The vial was fetched and Antonia's body tenderly carried away. Juices lay her in place beside his love, holding Theodora's hand. Hastaya uncorked the bottle. With the utmost care, she allowed the smallest drop to escape and fall between his lips. At first, it was as if a new power was exploring his form, adjusting to its nooks and crannies, testing each muscle group for strength and flexibility as he flexed and shuddered. Suddenly, his body went rigid in a spasm, locking it in place as blood began at his lips and broken blood vessels spread across his face. The vampires, confused, looked at Hastaya for guidance. She placed her hand over his heart. He is on the journey. We will wait. She stayed beside him, refusing sustenance to maintain the poisonous doses. At times, his muscles would suddenly twitch, or he would moan and mutter jumbled phrases. As the days wore off, his face took on a painful grimace. His jaws locked and his lips pulled back in agony. After 5 days, Hastaya could bear no more. Although exhausted, she gathered the vampires and cast a circle around him, hoping to somehow transfer their remaining strength to the warrior. For a moment, it appeared to work. His features relaxed, his furrowed brow smoothed. Then Drusus opened his eyes and searched about himself, seeking but not seeing. No, Theodora, don't cross. Don't join her. I'm here. Can't you hear me? Theodora! A primal scream erupted from him as he was jerked upright, like an enormous hook had slipped under his sternum and lifted him forward. He turned his face and realized where he was. He extended his hand to her. He said, Hestia, help me. She shook her hand. There is no more I can do. She held up the vial. Your body can no longer tolerate any more of this. And to her horror, he ripped it out of her hand. Before Hestia could respond, Drusus had upended the bottle in his mouth. His head snapped back, his arms flew away from his body, and as the blood burst through his skin, coating his body, he choked out, Theodora. I don't know what reading level I'm on. Coordinates? I don't know. Then the unforeseen force released him as the vampires rushed forward. Hestia placed her hand on his chest. I did go to college, if that's what you're asking. And knew. Drusus, too, was gone. Hestia turned to where Theodora lay and gasped. No longer merely pale, she was almost transparent, as the life force drained from each cell. Her body released the last traces of spirit held captive for those past days. The shattered soul of their young priest was gone forever. The pair lay, fingertips touching, like marble carvings above a tomb, equally beautiful, equally cold. The vampires slid loving fingers across each forehead, touching where a crescent once glowed, then over eternally silent lips and down to touch the center of each chest, where a heart once beat. Fists clasped across their chests, eyes closed. In unison, they bid the lovers, "Marry meet again." The shirt is Hunter x Hunter. Oh, and this is Adidas. I got it from this store called Zumiez. All right. So the farewell ritual held by vampires, while rare, is a ceremony of aching beauty infused with a raw grief for a loss. Anyone can imagine how it felt for the vampires of Capri during the full moon that month. They pained. They grew. The shadows prevailed. No one could ignore it. Hestia publicly rent her clothes and tore her hair in despair, issuing the famous statement, "Like an obscene, drunken villain, Vesuvius had vomited destruction upon our beloved Pompeii and Herculaneum. The unique beauty, grace, and spirit of those two magical cities will never be duplicated. We are unable to remain here in Capri, as we cannot bear to be near their desecrated corpse. By formal edict, the Vampire High Council will, henceforth, make our home elsewhere." The palace was sold. The pilgrimage began. These glasses I got from America's Best. That's where I got them from. America's Best. Adidas is a clothing company. See? Yeah, Adidas is a company. They sell, the ceiling that came with the house. They just put 2 ceiling fans in here, whoever the house belonged to before we bought it. All right. You might believe that, placed in Theodora's situation, you would have had strength or power to make better choices. None of us know, Fledgling, how we may be, until we are there. Some of it will be up to you. Some will come from the love sent by the goddess, and the rest will be how time unfolds within the circumstances. But know this, you have been chosen, and everything happens for a purpose. As for the journey, the remaining vampires of Capri joined the High Council in a search for their home. They settled in Florence, initiating an artistic fervor that some still believe to be unrivaled at any other time in human history. I don't know about these glasses. It doesn't say. It honestly does not say any name on them. I just know I got them from America's Best. Okay. But as years passed, the power of Rome grew more intrusive. Our ancestors began looking for more remote, more acceptable homes. In April of 421 AD, the vampire high priest Torsiella was traveling from Florence to northern Italy when she discovered an intriguing settlement that was being constructed by humans trying to escape barbarian invasions. This settlement was being built directly on a system of man-made islands surrounded by lagoons. Torsilia instantly felt a kinship with the humans, as well as the idea of building a world meant to be a fortress against outsiders. And she put the strength and wealth, talent, and integrity of vampire society behind the venture. The struggles, humans embraced her help, so much so that in 638 AD, the last of Torsiella's long life was to commission the building of the Palazzo Ducale, known today as Dodge's Place, for the human nobility that has shown her such acceptance and kindness. Directly across the Mediterranean, situated so that Torsiella could sit and gaze upon the lustrous city that would eventually be called Venice, the high priest built a fabulous island of her own, where she decreed the Vampire High Council had finally, after centuries of restlessness and longing for the sea, found its permanent home. She named the island San Clemente, after the warrior who had bound himself to the 4 centuries ago, just after she changed. Today, Fledgling, we do indeed make our ancestral home, the site of our beloved warrior high priest and our governing council on San Clemente Island, which adorns the Mediterranean. like an exquisite pearl just off the coast of Venice. Much, much more about our culture exists in the halls of San Clemente's Museum of Vampire History. Found below the rooms of our High Council, the most sacred of our ritual processes as well as the interpretations of vampire evolution are found in the Sanctuary of Nyx, another branch of studies you will encounter in the House of Night. As you progress through your years at the House of Night, you will learn more of your High Council. At this time, it is important only to understand that we are ruled by one benevolent High Priest who is voted into power by the entire body of vampires. Our High Priest answers only to the Vampire High Council, consisting of 7 priests who are chosen by the 7 national vampire districts and are revered for their wisdom and devotion to our goddess. These 8 vampires are eternally protected by our warriors, the sons of Erebus. So be at peace, Fledgling. Our High Priest resides over our council, and all is right in the world. So, in this book, you then... It gives you pages to pretty much, like, update your status as a vampire, technically. And then, of course, now there's a chapter 5, which I'm going to read. This is the last chapter of this book, and then we're actually going to start the series in my next video. Chapter 5, Words of Hope from Fellow Fledglings. So I don't have to really read it, but these are words of hope from other vampires who went through all this too. All right. 'Tis truth made more pure by fear and pain, though if 'twas possible, I would cry, Dark lady, mark me again, again. William Shakespeare. When I remember that moment, then I can speak no more, but my tongue falls silent, and at once a delicate flame courses beneath my skin, and with my eyes I see nothing, and my ears hum, and a wet sweat bathes me, and a trembling seizes me all over. Sappho. I follow Nyx as the surest guide and resign myself with implicit obedience to her sacred ordinances. Cicero. In the midst of darkness and decay and fear, my mark was a beautiful sapphire beacon, lending me strength and leading me to freedom and to Nyx. Sarah Osborne. Was I filled with fear, uncertainty, and trepidation on the day I was marked? Of course. But soon I learned fear can be overcome by faith. Uncertainty can lead to new beginnings, and trepidation can be vanquished by confidence. Being marked is truly about the magic of possibilities. Shekinah. The Fledgling Sonic. May Nyx's blessing find you strong and sure. Steadfast you shall be, even should fear betray. Though days turn dark and endless nights endure, with sweet love our goddess will guide your way. Listen not to whispers. Those thoughts deny death is not proud, nor does he rule your life. He is dust swept clean when Nyx hears you cry. Atropos cuts him with a goddess knife. Don't hearken to death. Instead embrace hope. She is sister to Nyx, more near, more true. And then greet joy, steadfast. She'll help you cope, dearest marked one. We all rejoice in you. With this prayer be gone, sadness, fear, and pain. Merry meet, part, and merry meet again. And there you go. That's the end. Now, with anyone that's listening still, this is not technically book 1. This is the Fledgling Handbook, which is supposed to give you an insight on some of the things you're going to hear about in the books. Some of the, pretty much, I like this book because it puts you in the story. Makes you feel like you're going to the school. Now, the order of the books, there are 13 books, but in the back of this book, they tell you the order of the books that were released at that time. It was Marked, Betrayed, Chosen, Untamed, Hunted, Tempted, and Burned. I'm going to read all those books. I'm going to read every single book in the series. So if you want to continue on this journey with me, you're welcome to it. Now, the first book, which is Marked, I can't find it. And that's when our main character, we get introduced to our main character, and that's when she indeed gets marked to begin her journey as a vampire. And I'm going to have to just read that one online, but that's okay. It'll be fine. I love you guys. So spreading positive energy. Y'all have a good day.